You're not getting the full story. And once you hear this, you're going to look at everything around Gucci Mane and Foogiano completely differently. Because what looks like a quiet label exit, it wasn't quiet at all. It was building. Behind closed doors, tension had been stacking for weeks. Missed calls, ignored messages, people in the middle trying to keep things from exploding. And if you've been watching 1017 closely, you probably felt something was off. The energy shifted. The pose slowed down. The unity? It started looking more like distance. But here's where it flips. Sources close to the situation are saying Gucci Mane didn't just let Foogiano walk away, he confronted him. Not over a phone call. Not through management. Face to face. And it wasn't calm. It wasn't business. It was personal. We're talking raised voices. Loyalty being questioned. Accusations flying about who switched up first. And the part nobody's saying out loud? This wasn't just about music, it was about respect. About who stayed solid and who didn't. Fans are shocked right now because the public image told a completely different story. Mentor and protege. Loyalty. Brotherhood. But what happens when that image cracks? And here's the twist that changes everything. People inside the circle are hinting this fallout didn't start with Foogiano leaving. It started way before that, with decisions, with moves, with things that never made it online. So now the real question isn't why Foogiano left 1017. It's what pushed it to the point where Gucci Mane had to step in himself. And trust me, what really happened behind that confrontation? That's where the story gets messy. The situation didn't erupt overnight. It had been simmering beneath the surface long before anyone outside the circle caught on. What people saw publicly was silence, distance, and a few subtle signs that something wasn't right. But inside the 1017 camp, the energy had already shifted. Conversations weren't flowing the same. Communication started breaking down. And when that happens in a label built on loyalty, it doesn't just fade away quietly, it builds tension. Gucci Mane has always been known for structure, discipline, and control over his roster. So when Foogiano began moving differently, it didn't go unnoticed. At first, it was small things. Missed check-ins. Delayed responses. Decisions being made without looping the team in. Nothing explosive on its own, but enough to raise eyebrows. People around the situation started whispering. Not publicly, not on social media, but behind the scenes, there were questions. Was Foogiano still locked in with the vision? Or was he starting to separate himself from what 1017 stood for? And here's where things began to get complicated. Because Foogiano wasn't just any artist on the roster. He was one of the faces of the movement. Someone Gucci Mane had publicly supported, invested in, and stood behind when it mattered. That kind of relationship isn't just business, it's personal. So when that connection starts to feel different, it hits deeper than a typical label disagreement. According to people close to the situation, the turning point didn't come from one big incident. It came from a pattern. A growing sense that things weren't aligned anymore. And when patterns start forming, they're hard to ignore. Gucci Mane reportedly tried to address it early, checking in, asking questions, trying to understand where Foogiano's mindset was. But the responses weren't clear, not direct. And in a space where clarity matters, that only made things worse. Meanwhile, others around the camp began to pick sides without saying it out loud. Some stayed quiet, trying not to get involved. Others started distancing themselves subtly, unsure of how things would play out. The unity that once defined the group began to feel fragile. And when a foundation like that starts to crack, it doesn't take much for everything else to shift with it. Fans, of course, didn't see any of this at first. On the outside, things still looked intact. But those paying closer attention noticed the change. The collaboration slowed. the interactions felt less natural. Even the energy in interviews and appearances didn't hit the same. It was subtle, but it was there. Then came the moment that pushed everything closer to the edge. Foogiano's actions started reflecting independence in a way that didn't align with the structure of the label. Moves that suggested he was thinking beyond 1017, or at least differently from how things were originally set up. That's when the conversation shifted from concern to confrontation. Not aggressive at first, but serious, direct, focused on figuring out where things were headed. And that's where emotions started to rise. Because for Gucci Mane, this wasn't just about an artist making independent decisions. It was about loyalty, about whether the foundation he built was being respected. And for Foogiano, it became about identity, about whether he was being seen as his own artist or just part of a system he no longer fully connected with. Two different perspectives. Both strong. Both unwilling to back down easily. That tension didn't explode immediately, but it stayed there, building quietly. Every conversation carried more weight than the last. Every interaction felt like it could tip things one way or the other. And the people around them could feel it. The atmosphere wasn't the same anymore. It was heavier, more uncertain. By the time the confrontation everyone's talking about actually happened, this wasn't a sudden clash. It was the result of everything that had been building for weeks, maybe even longer. And when something builds like that, it rarely ends calmly. By the time they finally stood in the same room, the energy wasn't neutral. It was already charged. No cameras, no social media, no filters. Just Gucci Mane and Foogiano facing each other with everything that had been building now sitting right there between them. And according to people who were close enough to hear parts of it, the conversation didn't start loud, but it didn't stay calm for long either. It opened with questions. Direct ones. "What's really going on?" Gucci reportedly asked, not in a casual tone, but in a way that made it clear he already sensed the answer. Foogiano didn't jump in immediately. That pause? It said a lot before he even spoke. When he finally responded, it wasn't explosive, it was controlled, measured. But underneath that control, there was tension. "I'm moving how I need to move," Foogiano replied. And that's where the shift happened. Because to Gucci, that wasn't just a statement, it sounded like separation. Like someone already halfway out the door. And that's when emotions started to rise. Not instantly aggressive, but sharper. More pointed. The conversation stopped being about checking in and started becoming about accountability. "You part of something bigger than just you," Gucci fired back. "You don't just move different without saying something." That line hit harder than anything before it. Because now this wasn't about miscommunication, it was about respect. About whether Foogiano still saw himself as part of the system that helped build his platform, or if he was already thinking beyond it. And once respect enters the conversation, things tend to escalate fast. Foogiano didn't back down. "I am bigger than just this," he responded. "I got my own direction too." And that right there, that was the moment everything cracked open. Voices got louder. The tone changed. This wasn't a calm discussion anymore. It was a confrontation. The kind where both sides feel like they're being misunderstood, and neither one is willing to step back first. People in the room reportedly started getting uncomfortable, not because it was physical, but because it was real. Too real. Gucci wasn't just speaking as a label head at that point. He was speaking as someone who felt personally invested. "I stood behind you," he said, his voice rising, "when it mattered." That loyalty's supposed to go both ways. And you could feel how much that meant. Because in his mind, this wasn't about control, it was about consistency. About keeping the same energy that was there from the beginning. But for Foogiano, it didn't feel that simple anymore. His perspective had shifted. His priorities had evolved. And in that moment, he wasn't trying to explain it, he was standing on it. I never switched. Foogiano shot back. I just ain't staying in one lane forever. That line? That's what divided everything. Because now the argument wasn't just about what happened, it was about what it meant. Gucci heard independence turning into distance. Foogiano saw growth being mistaken for disloyalty. Two completely different interpretations of the same situation, colliding in real time. The room went quiet for a second after that. Not calm, just heavy. And then Gucci stepped in closer, not aggressively, but with intensity that made it clear this was the final point of the conversation. "If you out, then say that," he said. "Don't move like you in and out at the same time." No yelling. No chaos. Just a statement that forced a decision. And from what people are saying, that's when everything became clear without needing another argument. Because sometimes, it's not the loudest moment that defines a situation. It's the one where nothing else needs to be said. Foogiano didn't argue after that. He didn't try to go back and explain. He just stood there for a second, nodded slightly, and that was it. No dramatic exit. No final words that tied everything together. Just a quiet understanding that things weren't the same anymore, and weren't going to be. The confrontation didn't end with resolution. It ended with separation. And once a moment like that happens face to face, there's no going back to how things were before. The aftermath didn't explode online right away, but behind the scenes, everything shifted fast. The room emptied, the conversation ended, but the impact of that moment carried into every corner of the 1017 circle. People who had been trying to stay neutral suddenly realized there was no neutral anymore. You were either aligned with Gucci Mane and the structure he built, or you were quietly acknowledging that Foogiano was stepping into something different. And that kind of split? It doesn't stay hidden for long. At first, it showed up in silence. Group chats that used to be active slowed down. Calls that normally got returned didn't. Meetings started happening without the same full circle present. Nobody announced anything publicly, but internally, the shift was obvious. The unity that once felt automatic now felt conditional. And when that happens, people start moving carefully, watching what they say, who they say it to, and how they position themselves moving forward. Fans began to sense it too, even without knowing the full story. Social media interactions changed. The energy between artists felt distant. Collaborations that once seemed guaranteed suddenly didn't happen. And in the world of hip-hop, where consistency and connection are everything, that kind of absence speaks loudly. Emotions ran high behind closed doors. Some people close to Gucci Mane reportedly felt like Foogiano's move was a clear break in loyalty. They saw it as someone stepping away from a system that had provided structure, visibility, and opportunity. From their perspective, it wasn't just about growth, it was about timing. About how and when those moves were made. And more importantly, how they were communicated. Others, though, didn't see it that way. There were voices, quieter but present, who felt like Foogiano was simply evolving. That he reached a point where he needed to move differently to fully step into his own identity as an artist. Not as a rejection of what 1017 represented, but as a progression beyond it. Those voices didn't create conflict, but they added complexity. Because now the situation wasn't one-sided, it had layers. And those layers started creating tension within the circle itself. You had artists and affiliates who respected Gucci's leadership and understood his expectations. At the same time, they could see where Foogiano was coming from. That balance made things uncomfortable. Conversations became more careful. Opinions were shared in smaller circles instead of openly. Nobody wanted to be seen as choosing sides, but in reality, sides were already forming. Meanwhile, Gucci Mane didn't go public with any emotional response. That was part of what made the situation feel even heavier. Instead of addressing it directly, he stayed controlled, focused, and quiet. But people close to him could tell this wasn't just business to him. It was personal. The kind of situation that makes you reevaluate not just one relationship, but how you approach all of them moving forward. Foogiano, on the other hand, began moving with a different kind of independence. Not loud, not confrontational, but intentional. His actions suggested he had already made peace with the direction he was taking. There was no visible attempt to repair things publicly, no effort to reshape the narrative in real time. Instead, he moved forward as if the decision had already been finalized long before the confrontation happened. That contrast, Gucci's controlled silence and Foogiano's quiet independence, created a space where speculation started to grow. Fans began asking questions. What really happened? Was it deeper than what anyone was saying? Was there something behind the scenes that hadn't been revealed yet? And because there were no clear answers, the curiosity only increased. The situation also began to influence how people viewed 1017 as a whole. Not in a negative way, but in a more analytical way. People started paying closer attention to how artists within the label were moving, how relationships were being maintained, and what this moment might mean for the future of the roster. It introduced a level of scrutiny that hadn't been as visible before. At the same time, there was a sense that this wasn't completely over. Not in terms of reconciliation, but in terms of impact. Moments like this don't just end, they ripple outward. They affect future decisions, future relationships, and the way both sides operate moving forward. And when those ripples start spreading, they tend to reveal more over time. For now, though, everything sits in a kind of quiet tension. No dramatic public fallout. No direct statements breaking everything down. Just a clear shift that everyone can feel, even if they don't fully understand it yet. And sometimes, that kind of silence says more than anything else could. What makes everything even heavier now is how the silence has started speaking louder than any statement ever could. No explosive interviews, no direct call-outs, no back and forth online. But the absence of that noise is exactly what's making people pay closer attention. Because when a situation this big doesn't get addressed publicly, it usually means both sides understand just how serious it really is. Gucci Mane isn't the type to react impulsively anymore. He's built his reputation on control, on moving with intention. And that's exactly what he's doing now. But that control? It doesn't mean there's no emotion behind it. People close to him are saying this situation forced a deeper reflection. Not just about Foogiano, but about the entire structure of 1017. About trust. About how much freedom an artist should have versus how much alignment is expected in return. Because when something like this happens, it doesn't just end with one person. It creates questions that affect everyone connected to that circle. And those questions are already starting to change how things move. Inside the camp, the atmosphere reportedly feels more focused now, but also more guarded. Artists are watching more carefully. Moves are being thought through twice instead of once. There's still respect, still ambition, still that drive, but there's also awareness. The kind that comes after a situation where things didn't go the way they were supposed to. At the same time, Foogiano's path is becoming clearer. He's not making noise about the situation, but his actions are speaking in a different way. There's a sense of independence in how he's moving now, like someone who understands that stepping away from something familiar comes with both risk and responsibility. He's not leaning on the past, he's pushing forward. And that kind of mindset? It doesn't come from confusion. It comes from a decision that's already been made. Fans are still trying to piece everything together. Some believe this was inevitable. that growth naturally leads to separation at some point. Others feel like something deeper must have happened behind the scenes, something that hasn't been fully revealed yet. And that divide in opinion is what keeps the conversation alive. Because without clear answers, people start building their own interpretations. But here's where things take another turn. There are quiet talks, nothing confirmed, nothing public, but conversations suggesting that this situation might not be completely closed off. Not in terms of going back to what it was, but in terms of how both sides move forward. Because in this industry, relationships don't always end clean. They evolve, they shift, and sometimes they reconnect in ways nobody expected. Still, right now, everything feels unresolved. Not chaotic, not explosive, just unfinished. The kind of situation where both sides are moving separately, but the connection between them hasn't fully disappeared. And that's what makes it so unpredictable. Because when something ends without a clear resolution, it leaves space for anything to happen next. Meanwhile, the spotlight stays on both of them. Every move Gucci Mane makes with 1017 is being watched more closely now. Every decision, every artist move, every sign of how he's adjusting after this situation. And for Foogiano, every step forward carries a different kind of weight. Not just as an artist, but as someone who made a decision that changed the direction of his career. That's where things stand right now. Two different paths. Two different mindsets. One moment that shifted everything. And the craziest part? This still doesn't feel like the end of the story. It feels like the point where things are about to get even more real. Because once both sides fully settle into their new positions, that's when the real outcomes start to show. Now here's where you come in. Because this situation isn't just about what happened between Gucci Mane and Foogiano. It's about how you read it. Was this a loyalty issue? Or was this an artist finally stepping into his own lane? Be real, because both sides hit different depending on how you see it. Do you think Gucci was right for checking it face to face and standing on structure? Or do you feel like Foogiano had to move how he moved to grow beyond 1017? And here's the real question nobody wants to answer. Was this bound to happen from the start? Drop your opinion in the comments, but don't play it safe. I want to know where you stand and why. And if you caught details others missed, timing, energy shifts, how everything played out, say that too. Because sometimes the real story isn't what's said out loud, it's what you notice in between. Make sure you hit like if you felt this breakdown, subscribe if you want the real stories without the watered down version, and turn on notifications. Because the second this situation updates, you already know we're going deeper. Stay locked in, because this one, it's not over yet.